The secret of Eve. Was she really the first woman? They say Eve was the first woman. But what if that story is incomplete? What if the paradise that seemed so perfect concealed a presence that was silenced before it even had a name? There's a passage in the creation story that few dare to question, a gap between chapters, a disregarded detail, a glaring absence. Someone has been erased from the origin of humanity, and no one spoke of it. But why? We're not talking about legend or conspiracy theory. We're discussing something that could change the way you perceive creation, faith, and even your own identity. The silence surrounding the beginning of everything may have a lot to say. But be warned, the answer isn't comfortable, and once you hear it, you won't be able to unhear it. An uncomfortable silence in paradise. There was a dense peace hovering over the garden, like a light mist cloaking an ancient secret. And amid this perfect paradise, there's something that nearly everyone overlooks, a strange silence between the lines of Genesis. One moment, God creates man and woman together. In his image, he created them male and female. Genesis 1:27. In the next, Adam is alone, and a woman emerges from his rib. Two beginnings. A story seemingly told twice. But why? What was lost between those words? Was someone erased? Or deliberately silenced? Picture Adam, sitting among the trees before Eve's arrival, gazing at the animals in pairs, trying to name them. Lion and lioness, rooster and hen, male and female. And I? A void whispers there. This passage in Genesis 2 seems to paint a picture of a lonely man in need of companionship. But what about the first account, where man and woman are created together at the same time? How do we explain this contradiction? The answer might not lie in what was written, but in what was omitted. What do you think? Was this silence accidental or intentional? Leave your answer in the comments. I'm eager to know. It's curious how life's greatest secrets often lie not in what is said, but in what is left unsaid. Here, that erasure between chapters compels us to ponder, is the Bible hiding someone? Or rather, did someone want to hide something from the Bible? A rabbi once said, God speaks more in silence than in thunder. Perhaps it's in this silence between the two accounts that the truth resides, a truth that no one dared to touch. And if it's true that there was a woman before Eve, what does that say about everything we've learned so far? This silence echoes in our lives too. How often are situations built on absences rather than presences? Sometimes, what you don't say about yourself reveals more than 1,000 words. Just as Adam may have had someone before Eve, many of us have lived stories that were silenced, feelings that were never acknowledged. And when we ignore those parts, we create incomplete versions of ourselves and of others too. In this case, silence is not peace, it's a gap, and every gap cries out for truth. What if I told you that perhaps this silence isn't a flaw in the text, but rather the echo of a forgotten presence? A trace of something or someone that was ripped from the story, not by God, but by human hands, as if to say, this needs to be controlled, this needs to be rewritten. But who decides what should remain and what should be erased? Proverbs 25:2 states, "It is the glory of God to conceal things, to search them out is the glory of kings." Perhaps today we are just beginning to hear this silence with new ears. The subtext of Genesis, two beginnings, one mystery. When we read Genesis closely, it's like opening a book with two covers and two different beginnings. In the first, man and woman appear together as equal partners in creation. But in the second, the woman is taken from the man's side, presented almost as a patch for Adam's loneliness. And this isn't just a minor detail, it's a shift in tone. It's as if the narrative gains a new frame, and with it, a new meaning. Doesn't that seem strange? Why retell the same story in such a different way? Is it merely repetition, or is there more behind it? Now imagine this second account as a play where Adam is the lead. He sleeps, God takes a part of him, not from his head, nor from his feet, but from his rib, and forms the woman. Adam's first words upon seeing her are almost poetic. This is now bone of my bones, and flesh of my flesh, Genesis 2:23. But this statement, which seems affectionate, also carries a hint of possession, of hierarchy. After all, Eve wasn't created from dust like he was. She was created from him, and this subtle difference may have served to justify centuries of inequality. Here's where we start to feel that the second account may have been an attempt to reorganize the narrative. As if someone said, the woman can't have come from the dust like the man. She needs to have come from him, to belong to him. Have you ever thought about that? Perhaps the first version of equality was too uncomfortable for a patriarchal society. Maybe the second account was shaped by the culture of the time rather than God's original desire. And that changes everything. Because if the Bible is the living word, then it also invites us to investigate what may have been silenced over the centuries. In practice, this leads us to a very contemporary question. How many times is our story told by others, and in a way that diminishes us? The woman, who was born from the same dust with the same soul and essence, has been placed in a position of helper, as if she is beneath rather than alongside. But Jesus himself breaks this mold. He speaks to women, teaches women, is served by women, he values them. And that points to something profound. What the world distorted, the kingdom seeks to restore. As it says in Galatians 3:28, there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. So tell me, have you ever felt like your story was told in a way that doesn't represent you? Have you ever felt like your voice was sidelined? Share with me in the comments, because sometimes what liberates us the most isn't hearing a new truth, but discovering that the old one has always been there, hidden between the lines. The woman who came before the rib. Before the rib, there was dust, the same dust that formed Adam. And according to some ancient traditions, a woman named Lilith was also shaped from that clay, created from the same earth, the same breath, the same essence. But Lilith refused to lie beneath. She didn't want to accept a role she saw as inferior. "Why should I be beneath you when we were created the same?" she reportedly said, according to the alphabet of Ben Sira. And with that bold and unsettling question, Lilith disappears. Or rather, she is erased. Because she didn't fit into the narrative of submission that would come later. Imagine that dialogue in Eden. Adam, confused, tries to argue. But someone needs to lead. And Lilith firmly responds, leadership is not domination. She didn't shout, didn't fight. She simply withdrew. She chose exile over forced obedience, and that's where everything changes, because her refusal challenges a structure, and the challenge becomes a threat. Lilith ceases to be a woman and begins to be a legend, and soon after a taboo. Her story was suppressed but not forgotten. Even today she reappears in the margins of texts, in the whispers of tradition, like an uncomfortable echo of what could have been. Now think with me, how many Liliths have you seen around? Women who refuse to accept a predefined role, who question, who confront, and for that, they are labeled as difficult, rebellious, dangerous. The world still tries to do with them what it did with Lilith, erase them. And the most curious part is that this starts very early. From a young age, we hear that a well-behaved girl doesn't speak loudly, that a wise woman builds her home, as if that were synonymous with silence. But being wise also means knowing one's own worth. It means saying no when something doesn't honor your dignity. And this brings us to a great lesson. Sometimes, honoring the image of God in us means not bending down. It means remembering that we were created equal, with the same breath. That's why this passage from John 8:32 fits here so powerfully. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Lilith, even shrouded in mystery, reminds us that freedom is also part of creation. And if God is love, He is not offended by those who wish to live with freedom and dignity. Perhaps what offends God the most is the forced silence over the truth. So tell me, did you already know the story of Lilith? What do you think about the possibility of there being a woman before Eve? Leave your opinion in the comments. This conversation still has a long way to go, and we need to have the courage to keep listening to what has been silenced. Lilith, from Eden to exile. Lilith's departure from Eden was not just an escape. It was a choice. A silent cry from someone who preferred freedom over the comfort of a gilded cage. While Eve is presented as a suitable helper, Lilith is the one who decides to leave. And that's where she crosses an invisible line from creation to rebellion, from companion to symbol of chaos. But what if true rebellion is simply refusing an unjust structure? What if what was called the fall was in fact an act of profound awareness? They say that upon leaving Eden, Lilith went to dwell on the fringes, in the desolate regions, outside of order, outside of control. But instead of disappearing, she flourished as a symbol, not of evil, as later claimed, but of refusal. She represents everything that disturbs when freedom challenges power. And it was precisely because she wouldn't stay silent that she became what tradition fears the most, a woman who doesn't need to be shaped by anyone. And at this point, the question that few dare to ask arises: why the fear of a woman who chooses her own path? It's common for everything that doesn't fit to be labeled as a threat, and this holds true even today. Women who choose not to conform to marriage, motherhood, religion, or societal norms are still viewed with suspicion. But this isn't new. It was the same with Lilith, and the logic behind it remains. If you don't submit, you are dangerous. But God didn't create submission as a synonym for inferiority, and the proof of that is in Isaiah 1:17. Learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, defend the rights of the fatherless, plead the cause of the widow. The commandment is justice, not control. Now, pause and think. How many times have you had to choose between being who you are or being accepted? How many times did you compromise your own truth to fit an expectation? Lilith is a mirror, not for evil, but for courage. And perhaps her greatest sin wasn't disobedience, but being too aware. The Eden wasn't enough for her if it required silence. And this teaches us something powerful. Sometimes true faithfulness to God begins when we say no to everything that wounds the image of God in us. Have you ever experienced a moment when you needed to distance yourself from an environment that silenced you just to breathe again? Share with me in the comments. Let's give voice to what has been silenced for too long, because perhaps in exile lies the beginning of true freedom. When heaven rewrites earth, when Lilith exits the stage, Eve enters. And what we have there is not merely the replacement of one character, it's the exchange of a symbol. Eve is not made from the dust like Adam. She is made from him, from his rib. This carries a powerful message. The woman now exists from the man, not alongside him. And what's even more curious is that Adam names her. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Genesis 2:23. Prior to this, he had not named any being equal to him. This changes everything. Eve is born with an identity that is not her own, but assigned. This moment serves as a watershed. Heaven had created equality, but earth decided on hierarchy. The substitution of Lilith for Eve marks the beginning of a narrative where autonomy is replaced by molding. And this resonates to this day. How many times do people try to rewrite us, adjust us, redefine us so that we fit into what is more comfortable for them? The creation of woman from man can be seen as the first record of rewriting, not by God, but by the human desire to control what it does not understand. And perhaps that's why, even today, many feel insecure in the face of others' freedom. But here's something beautiful. God did not turn away from either Lilith or Eve. Despite their vastly different stories, both reveal facets of the divine. Eve shows us how, even when molded, a woman remains essential to the plan of life, and Lilith, even when rejected, lives on in the margins. The question remains, have we also tried to mold God's will instead of listening to it as it is? As it is written in Jeremiah 18:6, "Can I not do with you, O house of Israel, as this potter has done?" Now let me make a special invitation. Write in the comments a biblical phrase you would create, inspired by everything this segment has awakened in you. It could be something like, "The clay that refuses to be broken is still loved by the potter." Create your own. And if this message has already spoken to you, leave a like as if lighting a candle of gratitude. It's just a small gesture, but it can illuminate the heart of someone who is in silence. And if you want to continue this journey with us, subscribe to the channel. Here, every step is taken with care, with truth, and with hearts turned to those seeking more than answers, seeking reconciliation, the silenced echoes of Jewish tradition. It's curious how, even though Lilith has been silenced in Christianity, she appears strongly in older Jewish traditions. The Talmud, the Zohar, the Midrash all mention her name. Sometimes as a demon, sometimes as a seductive figure, almost always with an aura of mystery and power. But what these texts show us is that Lilith has never truly been forgotten. She has been fought against, ridiculed, feared, but forgotten? No. That alone reveals something precious. What scares the system often carries a truth it would prefer to hide. Rabbis told stories that Lilith had wings, that she flew away from Eden, murmuring through the deserts. She became a symbol of what escapes control. And perhaps that's why institutional Christianity chose to silence her completely. The fear was not in Lilith herself, but in what she represented. A whole woman, made from dust, who didn't need to be created from anyone. That was too dangerous. How can one accept that the original creation was one of equality when the world built on it was founded on hierarchy? And this tension remains present. Even today, many churches hesitate to touch on the subject. They prefer to ignore it, as if discussing Lilith would open a hole in the floor of tradition. But the real hole lies in pretending she never existed. Because by denying her existence, we also deny a part of the human experience, the part that questions, that challenges, that chooses different paths. And let's be honest, God was never afraid of questions. Quite the opposite. In Isaiah 1:18, he says, "Come, let us reason together." In other words, God invites dialogue, not imposed silence. The question that lingers is, does the silence surrounding Lilith reveal more about us than about her? Was it fear of her strength? Or fear of our own vulnerability? When we deny someone's story, it's often because it forces us to reevaluate our own. And Lilith invites us to do just that. Rethink the beginning, revisit what we've been taught, reevaluate what we hold sacred simply because it has been said many times. Sometimes what we need most is courage, not to confront others, but to open our eyes to what we prefer not to see. Lilith and Eve, mirrors in conflict. Lilith and Eve, two women, two origins. Two paths that diverge, yet meet at a common point: society's view of femininity. One is the woman who says no, the other learns to live the yes. Lilith represents the free spirit, who prefers exile to submission. Eve represents molding, the woman adapted to the new scenario, inserted into a structure. But what if these two are not opposites, but rather complementary? What if both reveal pieces of what every woman carries within herself? The conflict between Lilith and Eve didn't begin with them. It started with how the world chose to see them. A world that has always struggled with balance. It's either submission or rebellion, either purity or sin. There's no room for the middle ground. And this imbalance became a lens through which feminine spirituality has been judged throughout the centuries. When Jesus meets the Samaritan woman at the well, he breaks this logic. He doesn't accuse her, doesn't diminish her. He listens, he sees her, and transforms her into a bearer of truth. John 4:39. But why is the fear of a free woman still so present? Is it because she threatens a structure built on control? Perhaps the issue has never been with Lilith or Eve, but with those who wrote their stories, or with those who used them to justify dominion. It's as if, throughout the centuries, religions have fed this rivalry between freedom and obedience, as if they were mutually exclusive. But Jesus never asked for silence. He asked for love. He never demanded blind submission. He offered truth. In practice, this leads us to reflect. How many times within ourselves do these two mirrors clash? Sometimes we want to please, to fit in, to be accepted like Eve. At other times we want to say enough. We want to be heard. We want to break free like Lilith. But perhaps the path lies not in choosing one side, but in understanding that God calls us to wholeness. He sees us completely, with strength, with fragility, with courage, and with care. And if we recognize that, we can see that the conflict doesn't have to divide us. It can set us free. From myth to fear, the demonization of Lilith. Over time, Lilith ceased to be just a forgotten figure and became something much more frightening. A demon, accused of stealing children, seducing men at night, spreading diseases. But why such a transformation? What happens when someone questions the structure and doesn't bend? Simple. She becomes a threat. And a threat needs to be fought, discredited, destroyed. And the easiest path for that is to demonize her. After all, no one listens to a demon. No one sympathizes with it. Fear is the perfect silencer. It's important to note that Lilith was never described as evil by God. This entire construction arose from human tradition, an attempt to turn her refusal into something monstrous. But doesn't that say more about those who labeled her than about her? In Matthew 12:34, Jesus said, "Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." In other words, the way we treat others reveals much more about what we carry within us than about who they truly are. Demonizing Lilith was a way to hide the discomfort with her freedom. This process still occurs today, even outside of sacred texts. Think of those who choose a path outside of expectations. How often are they seen as problematic, difficult, rebellious, when in reality they are just trying to live authentically? It's easier to label someone as wrong than to admit that perhaps the structure is wrong. Lilith was called everything but what she may have truly been from the start, free, and that discomforts, because true freedom scares those who live bound by norms they never questioned. The deeper truth is that by demonizing figures like Lilith, we also create space to demonize parts of ourselves. That part that wants to speak but is afraid. That part that wants to take a stand but was taught to be silent. The part that wants to be whole but has been fragmented by doctrines and pressures. And perhaps it's time to make peace with that. To understand that Lilith's freedom doesn't need to be rejected. It can be redeemed. Because in God's kingdom, even the exiled have a place. Even what was lost can be rescued, the body and the soul, the invisible war. When Eve is created from Adam's rib, the gesture seems at first glance filled with tenderness. But over time, this image began to carry another message. The idea that woman belongs to man, that she came from him, for him. This narrative has fed for centuries a distorted view of women's roles, not as partners, but as possessions. What started as a poetic metaphor became the foundation for a structure that confines. And that's how an invisible war begins, not in the body, but in the soul. This war reflects in the subtleties of daily life, in the times a woman is interrupted while speaking, in decisions made without consulting her, in the spirituality that teaches her to be silent but never to lead. And this goes far beyond the religious environment. It's as if the whole world echoes that first phrase, "You shall be called woman, because you were taken out of man." But does being taken from someone mean being beneath him? Or does this rib, so symbolic, represent something deeper? Perhaps the part of man that he also lost and still doesn't understand. Because if Eve was created from the rib, that also means Adam was, in a sense, emptied. Something was taken from him, and the emptiness that remains still cries out for understanding. Many men unknowingly carry this lack. They seek in relationships, in power, in achievements, something to fill what they lost in the beginning. And perhaps the secret isn't in dominating, but in humbly recognizing this absence. In Ecclesiastes 4:9-10, we read, "Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion." It's not about hierarchy, but about partnership. And here's where the war can start to be won. When we understand that this story speaks not just of creation, but of reconciliation, that the woman is not half of the man, nor his shadow. She is a reflection of the divine image, whole in herself just as he is. The body may have been separated, but the soul still cries out for unity. And if God's plan was communion, then any structure that turns this into dominion is straying from the essence. The true paradise is built when we recognize each other's value, not as fragments but as wholes walking side by side, the invisible legacy of the first woman. Lilith may have vanished from official scriptures, but her shadow has never stopped circulating among us. She lives in the margins, in whispered stories, in dreams that no one can explain. Even without being named, she remains present as a symbol of a truth that insists on breathing. That woman was created whole, not dependent. This invisible legacy, rejected, censored, feared, is like a seed planted in dry soil. No one sees it, but it's there, ready to bloom when the time allows. Throughout the centuries, this legacy has been passed from woman to woman, often without words. It's in the firm gazes, in the difficult choices, in the courage to be who one is, even when the world demands otherwise. Lilith may have been erased from texts, but her essence continues to manifest in art, in poetry, in the silent faith that insists on resisting. It's no coincidence that she has resurfaced with such strength in recent times, not because we want to relive the past, but because we feel something was left behind and needs to be rescued. This search for the first woman is not mere historical curiosity, it's a spiritual thirst. It's the desire to reconnect with the piece of history that was torn away, and along with it, parts of ourselves. When women discover that there was someone before Eve, something ignites, not a spirit of revolt, but a flame of recognition. It's like hearing for the first time a story that echoes within the chest, even if it was never spoken aloud. Romans 8:22 says, "For we know that the whole creation groans and labors with birth pangs together until now." Perhaps this groaning includes the memory of all that has been forgotten, and even if many try to reduce Lilith to a fable, her legacy does not fade, it transforms. And this transformation is happening right before our eyes. Every time someone questions, every time a woman says, "This doesn't represent me," every time we seek to comprehend the fullness of creation, Lilith comes back to life, not as a character, but as a symbol, and a symbol has power. Because it connects the visible to the invisible, the present to the eternal. Perhaps the right question isn't who was Lilith, but rather, what can she still teach us? The fragmented paradise between control and mystery. Accepting that there may have been a woman before Eve is more than questioning chronology. It's opening a crack in a system that seemed solid. Because if Lilith came first and was erased, then the paradise we were told may have been edited. And that strikes deep. The idea that something as sacred as creation was shaped by human hands causes discomfort. But is the real scandal in that? Or in the fact that we prefer the comfort of a lie to the challenge of facing the mystery? Admitting the possibility of a censored narrative requires spiritual courage. It's like facing a broken stained glass window where pieces are missing, yet the light continues to shine through. Mature faith is not the one that ignores questions, it's the one that walks with them. And perhaps, if there is something God expects from us, it is not blind obedience, but a willingness to seek sincerely. Proverbs 2:3-5 says, "If you cry out for discernment and lift up your voice for understanding, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God." In other words, seeking is also an act of worship. The problem is that for too long, control has been confused with faith. Repeating doctrines has become a sign of loyalty. But faith that does not tolerate questioning is not faith, it's fear. A true relationship with God invites us into the mystery, and mystery does not deny truth, it expands it. The fragmented paradise is not evidence of divine failure, but of our attempt to organize the sacred according to our own molds, and in that effort we lose precious pieces of history and of the human essence. This reflection calls us to a delicate yet essential point. Who had the power to decide what would be told? Who defined which stories would be sacred and which were too dangerous to remain? Perhaps this is the true challenge of contemporary faith, not to repeat, but to restore, to gather the fragments of paradise, to admit that there were cuts, and with humility ask, God, what do I still not know? Because the faith that listens is good, but the faith that questions, that transforms. What else was forgotten? If Lilith was erased, who else remained in the shadows? What other stories were set aside, hidden between lines and interpretations? The question echoes like a call. It's not just about a forgotten woman, but about a wounded collective memory. How many other truths have been lost in the folds of time? And if we are only scratching the surface of what really happened at the beginning of everything. The search for Lilith doesn't end with her. It merely lights the lantern toward a much larger celestial archive. Perhaps when we look at the Bible, we need to learn to listen to what isn't written as well. The pauses, the subtext, the silences. Because God doesn't speak only through words, He also reveals through absences. Psalm 25:14 tells us, "The secret of the Lord is with those who fear Him, and He will show them His covenant." In other words, there are sacred secrets reserved for those willing to go beyond the obvious. And this journey is not just intellectual, but profoundly spiritual. Seeking what was forgotten is also seeking the face of God with more truth. We learn from a young age that Eve was the first. But what if she wasn't? And if, by correcting this order, God is not calling us to chaos, but to healing? Because bringing Lilith back into the conversation isn't about idolizing the past. It's about reconciling with what was left out. It's acknowledging that there is more to the divine plan than what has been institutionalized. It's opening ourselves to what God still wants to reveal, not as novelty, but as restoration. A truth that has always been there, but that few have had the courage to hear. And now, perhaps you realize, this story isn't just about Lilith. It's about everything that was torn from your identity too. It's about the parts of you that were told to be silent, about the feelings that were deemed wrong, about the dreams that were seen as dangerous. And if, deep down, this spiritual journey through the story of the first woman is also a call for you to reclaim who you were before you were overly molded. Perhaps the greatest secret of Eve isn't in what she lived, but in what came before her. And as we look at Lilith, we don't seek a rival, but a reflection of what was left behind, of the whole woman, the forgotten voice, the freedom hidden between the pages of time. This journey isn't about rewriting the Bible. It's about allowing the Bible to rewrite us from within, revealing what has always been there. But that tradition silenced. The silence between the chapters of Genesis echoes in many of us, in the parts of the soul that were cut to fit, in the pieces of identity that no one taught us to love. But now, having heard this call, the question is, what will we do with this truth? Because true faith isn't the fear of knowing, it's the courage to draw closer to God, even when He shows us something we didn't expect. If this story touched something within you, leave a comment with your reflection. And if you want to continue this journey with me, click the like button. It's your way of saying, I heard what the silence was saying. Dutton, and before you go, the next video awaits you with a revelation that goes even deeper. Why did the serpent speak to Eve and not to Adam? What did the enemy already know that we still don't understand?